Шановні колеги, я думаю, що вже час починати нашу наступну секцію. Секція, яка
Dear colleagues, I think it's already time to start our next session, which is dedicated to entering of Ukraine to the European digital market. And again, it's concerning our legislation in this very field. Dear colleagues, do you hear me? I truly hope that you can hear something. I would like to invite our first speaker, Mr. Serhiy from the Committee of Verkhovna Rada on Digital Transformation. Mr. Serhiy. Is everything okay with your connection? Does it work or it doesn't? If you need any assistance, now I will call our technical specialist. Does anybody hear me at all? If possible, write in the chat at least. Yeah, we can hear you. Okay. Good, then just a minute. Mr. Serhiy, please try to reload your computer. Sometimes such things happen. Or just try to leave the conference and come again. Thank you very much.
While we
are waiting for Mr. Serhiy, Ms. Olha, maybe you will begin? Not to lose time. Yeah, can you hear me? Very good. So we are inviting you. The floor is yours. Dear colleagues, I would like to begin with the fact that it's spring. Ukraine filled in the questionnaire that is necessary in order to gain the membership in the EU and integration. There were integration achievements for the last few years, and in the conclusions to this questionnaire, the European community assessed on a high level Ukrainian achievements. That means that we are fulfilling our work in timely and qualitative manner. We are working on adapting these conditions, and the main three components are general policy in the field of communications and also digital identification and trust services. I would like briefly stop on achievements of each of these directions. In the law of Ukraine on digital communications, we are talking to EU countries. Digital communication. Also, we've been working according to the EU standards, and currently the digital policy support to Ukraine project of EU in Ukraine, they are developing a secondary legislation, and one of the important steps of our country and way to that its participation in the bodies of European regulators of at the moment. Now we received a status of the member of Euro-Observer that will help us to provide the EU practices, best practices in Ukraine, and understand better European legislation. Also, as an initiative, Ukraine is studying possibilities of implementation, the documents like DSA-DMA Acts, and also to work with the EU in this direction. As for the central policy, then I would like to mention that this is a sensitive issue for Ukraine because the 700 megahertz, it depends on Ukraine. These are armed forces and this state services, and it's impossible to avoid to work on that nowadays, so it was postponed from objective reasons. We are also developing legislative acts that will help to compensate these particles to the users. We continue working on different networks in order to ensure the high-speed internet for citizens, and we managed to improve this infrastructure up-country earlier, and now it is ruined greatly. And also in 2 years we covered more than 9,000 villages and village settlements with the mobile internet. This is 9 million users, and some of them got improvements. And also we are ensuring development of the connection. There is subvention of many kilometers of cables in the villages of Ukraine, and in order for digital services to be available for everyone, then we are providing access to 4G network, and one of the important goals is provision of new technology of 5G connection, and next year we are planning to cover that with 5G. We are also taking into account the experience of our colleagues, like who are sharing 700 and 800 megahertz from, like, excluding the operators of the mobile connection in order to provide the connection of the fourth generation on the railways, and also access of 5G in the 700 megahertz and 4,300 megahertz. And as for the tenders, for the mentioned, we are participating in tenders. And also we are planning to create transport corridors in order to cover the whole territory of Ukraine, and we are working on the line of program of self-connecting Euro facility. And as for the trust services, then we are making as much as we can in order to make this available, to make digital services available, and we have the plan of implementation of such kind of services, concluding a certain agreement, and a similar agreement was not concluded by the EU with any other country. And we need a range of products that can be done from our legislation. And our legislation in the field of trust services, it will be done according to the European. And there is a really active work on preparation to the second reading, and we are also trying to check the digital signatures in the EU. On the final stage, there is the network of digital identification of ELIDAS according to specifications of the EU, and that will allow Ukrainians to use digital services. Actually, it's a really long process, but this week the government adopted the resolution on experimental project, which will allow, before this trust agreement, resolve the interaction in the sphere of this kind of services. It means that in the EU they will recognize Ukrainians as improved ones, and we are recognizing EU, and so we will work on the personal data, and this will improve further documents between Ukraine and other countries. All these directions of our work are planned to work before the agreement on association. But if we are talking about these moments, so The list of these acts was defined together with that commission. These are acts about the safety of a network and information system, open data, personal data, joining Ukraine to the program of the EU in digitalization, also the network and information safety, payment services, protection of kids and the internet, use of mobile things and other issues. In general, it's more than 100 tasks for implementation of approximately 70 acts. EU and most tasks, it's end of 2023 in order to be able, in comparison with the economics of that, we are planning to create the TASI in Ukraine, TASI network, and this measures the digital progress of the country in 4 fields: access to internet, it's trade, it's access to digital services, and digital literacy of the population. These 4 directions, they are following the compass and also the Ministry of Digital Transformation. And now together with this, we developed the basics for institution system and the data collection that are relevant for that. And moreover, now we are moving towards during the EU initiative roaming just like at home, and we just signed a joint application for Ukrainians, but we are working so that the roaming policy in Ukraine and EU will be there on all the time, and we are determining steps and deadline for this process, and this will last again the amendments to the Agreement on Association in part in 17.3 Annex. So we are actively working on the integration process, and to this process are involved more than 20 state bodies, and this synergy is necessary and will help us to get the digital visa free connection. Thank you very much, Ms. Olha, for your speech, and I will have a lot of questions to you, but now we have to give the floor to Mr. Serhiy. Can you already present? Yeah, hi, I'm glad to hear you. I am sorry, colleagues, for my technical difficulties yesterday and today. They are repeating, unfortunately, but thanks to you being together, we will win with we will have electricity and connection, and we'll have no problems. Hello, dear participants of the forum. I would like to speak about the following thing. Ukraine developed and transferred to the European Union strategy of integration to the EU together with a plan of actions for this integration, as it was provisioned by the article on association between Ukraine and the EU from the other side, and their members, country members from the other side, and it was ratified by 1668 from 2014, and later on we will talk about that as agreement about association. So since November 21st, there was a roadmap created, and it includes a few directions for integration, which includes the association between Ukraine and the EU countries. In particular, that is communication, that is digital services, digital identification, active regulation of these spheres further on, and also involving cybersecurity and the proper level of protection of written data, which is really important, and some of them we have already in line. And according to all these moments, Ukraine has to ensure to each participant equal opportunities of access to knowledge that are provided in information communication technologies. Digitalization is aimed at creating benefits in different spheres of life. That is the access to different kind of services, financial, administrative, medical, and others. And introduction of this has to be done on the platform, and we are increasing productivity in using all of these technologies. And digitalization of Ukraine has to promote use of great environment and creative market, and also It has to be in the regional cooperation, local cooperation of our state to the EU. So I think that this is the way to European Union, and it was obvious for everyone. And also Ukraine has to join European World Market of E-commerce and different activities, and it has to deepen cooperation on different levels, and digitalization has to help Ukraine to work with digital and global systems and integration to EU markets of key priorities on the way to ensuring the strategic course of the state and also membership of Ukraine in the EU. During the in Verkhovna Rada, there is a really active work that is done. In particular, first, it's informing the sphere of digital communication. On 16th of December 2020, Verkhovna Rada adopted the law on state communications with the requirements that are there on a timely manner, and also creating the conditions for free exchange and free communications. And also we are talking about legislation in the field of communications and provision all over the territory of Ukraine, qualitative services for end users. Also on 16th of July 2020, there was adopted a law on National Commission, which is conducting the control on radio spectrum, and also gives legislative ground for the resolution of doubtful issues and also provision of services of connection. Also, it was conducted, a huge work was done for the virtual assets and the development of such markets in Ukraine and in the world. It follows the creation of new that is in non-material form. They are announcing that, and they are formulating, and the law of Ukraine on assets from the 8th of September regulates the relationship that is in use of virtual assets in Ukraine, and also the grounds of that kind of policy. And currently our committee is working on taxation, which will allow to make it so that the virtual assets, the law on virtual assets, will come in action. Our committee is also working on such thing as 15th July. There was a law of Ukraine adopted, and that is from on formation of digital economy in Ukraine during the nearest times, and to create more highly technical products that will help the growth of our VAT. And this law was aimed in particular at creation of the environment that stimulates development of digital economy and with high quality. And also, like Mikhail Fedorov was one of the initiators of such a project, Ministry of Digital Transformation. We know that a lot of companies already involved to this activity. If not for the war, even more companies would have participated in all of that. As for the cybersecurity, this topic requires a special attention, and Russian Federation is making hybrid attacks to us, including usage of sniper attacks, and also they are trying to get access to information contained in the digital networks. And also all over the world, even in spite of war, even in the regions where there is no war, the number of cyber attacks is growing, and they are involving into the citizens' life and in business sphere and many others. Since 2018, Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine a citizen of the state and general interest in cyberspace. Now Ukraine is actively introducing different services and builds a digital society, so it's incredibly important to ensure cyber security for the critical infrastructure and their cooperation with the EU and NATO, and also the information about cyber attacks, sanctions that are provided. And therefore, in our committee nowadays, we are working with improvement of national legislation in the sphere of cyber security. This is a really important direction as of now. So strategic documents in the field of national security, we are talking about development of all of that and also how the society is reacting to cyber threats. And our committee supports creation of the critical infrastructure, which is based on responsibility among the partners and also construction of that system, cybersecurity. Yeah, we hope for governmental support of legislative initiatives that will be aimed at implementation of these strategic priorities of the state. The working groups at the committee, they prepared the draft law on this kind of structure, 2219 registration number in 2021. This law is going to regulate the legal relationship related to protection of critical infrastructure, and this law is, of course, an inevitable part of legislation of Ukraine. And on 18th of October 2022, that is recently, also there were draft law on amending some laws of Ukraine in the sphere of protection of critical infrastructure of Ukraine. And for 12 months after cancellation, the authorized body and production of the critical infrastructure, they are using this, and state special services, they were conducting that earlier on, and this service, they might complete these functions, and they have the legislative base for that. And what is going to be adopted by Verkhovna Rada, the law on amendment of some laws of Ukraine, that and agreements concluded with the European Union on provision of services and legislation of the EU by digital tools. 6173 registration numbers. It was adopted in the first reading in 2022 in May. And just as you mentioned, that I'm hurrying a bit just because right after this forum, I has to be on the meeting of our committee, and there we are going to consider including this draft clause 6173, and we are going to make it ready for further voting. So maybe it will be adopted in the second reading, and I truly hope that it might happen even this year. And I think that this is very, very important, in particular because we received a status of the candidate to membership in the EU, and we want to make all the necessary steps as soon as possible in order to join the European Union, and we can define it in many things. So adoption of this draft law will speed up the participation in the EU, and also it will make us closer to their requirements. And the peculiarity of this draft law is that we are offering the mutual acknowledgement of digital services, and also the Ukraine is qualified, and a qualified digital signature that is qualified by the qualified producers in the European Union, and also the list of the members. We are really moving fast from the point of view of standards in the EU, and as a result of this first phase of implementation on the agreement with the EU, European Commission supported the update 17.73. Everything that is used in different legal acts about internet requires fast preparation of projects in the sphere of digital economy and introduction of all these moments, and therefore the Ministry of Transformation is working all the time on active legislation and is implementing. And I have this meeting in 4 or 5 minutes. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for invitation. Thanks to everybody who presented, and I truly hope that in cooperation we will be able to look for optimal solutions and improve our legislation to be perfect and promote our joining the European Union. Thank you very much. I understand that you already had to hurry up. I have a lot of questions both to you and to Ms. Olha, and I will prepare the questions next week already. I will either send those or maybe even we will be able to meet in person. Thank you one more time for your participation. So what will be better for you, Ms. Lilia? I have questions about Digital Market Act, Digital Service Act. As far as I understand, Mr. Sahi didn't mention those, and they are not, of course, mentioned in our publication. Do we have official translation of these documents? Do we have assessment of impact of those documents that are adopted already by European Union for the Ukrainian market? And are there already some things done how Ukraine should move in terms of implementation of these acts? I offer to Ms. Olha and Ms. Lily maybe to discuss that between yourself, because probably those are going to be different points of view. What would be more convenient? Maybe Ms. Olha will answer my question, or there will be Ms. Lilia who starts. Hello, dear participants. I need 3 or 5 more minutes in order to get to the place where I can get the normal connection. So if possible, Ms. Olha will just take the floor, and meanwhile, I will come to my home. Thank you very much, Ms. Olha, for your wonderful presentation. I understood a lot of things, and there is still a lot of questions that are remaining. I asked already 2 of them. If possible, please do comment. Sure, I have some problems with my camera. I can't turn it on. But as for DSA-DMA, I mentioned briefly in my speech that the Ministry of Digitalization started the preliminary analysis how we can consider these facts. Indeed, they are not our obligations, because actually the European Union itself just begins to work on those. In particular, the Act on Services entered into force only on 16th of November, if I'm not mistaken, so that European Union just begins all this work, and for example, setting the coordinators of these kind of services that are going to be key coordinators in this process has to take place in the European Union till February 2023, so the whole European Union is going to work on the RS system. We are analyzing these 2 acts, and now we faced the issue like how to determine this digital coordinator in Ukraine. We applied during the committee and association in our to the European side. We asked for a consultation from their side. Maybe they have some kind of a vision how it might work, and we agreed on such a cooperation. But as of today, we didn't receive any instructions, because to the questions of coordinator of the digital services, there have to be like this body has to consider different things. It's the issue of the anti-monopoly committee, and also the tele-radio broadcasting, and many bodies. So there's a question whether it has to be a synergy, or it has to be like the new body has to be created. So all of that is processed in consideration, not only in Ukraine but also in the European Union, and we are expecting how it's going to be commented from the European Union, and then we are implementing their practice at our place. As for the translation, like at least the ministry doesn't have the translation yet. We will come to different projects, and one of the projects promised to help us with the translation. Now we have only the technical translation, but of course we need to have more professional translation in order for us to be able to analyze these 2 acts in proper manner. And we are planning to include those acts to the roadmap of integration to the unified digital market. This process will become simpler because we are updating that, as we agreed preliminarily with the European side that the roadmap is a live tool that we can amend and correct, because the right of the European Union is really dynamic. And if we are talking about amendments to the annex, the process is a bit more complicated, so we are going to talk about that. And DSA-DMA, we are in the process, but now there is no clear picture of implementation of these regulations. We are working on that.
Пані Ольго, дуже дякую. От
Thank you very
зараз
much, Ms.
Ліля
Olha. And
добіжить
now
до
Lilia
більш
will
стабільного
come to
інтернет-зв'язку.
a more stable
Тим не менш,
internet
я хочу
connection.
розказати, що
Nevertheless,
саме
I would
Лілія
like to
Олексюк
mention that
була
Lilia
автором
Oleksiuk
перекладу,
was the
який вже
author of
став
the
офіційним
translation that
перекладом
became already the
Європейського
official
кодексу
translation of the
електронних
European
комунікацій,
Code of
на підставі
Digital
якого
Communications,
і був
based on
розроблений
which
український
was
закон про
developed actually
електронні
Ukrainian
комунікації.
law on digital
І була
communications.
створена робоча група
And
при комітеті Верховної Ради в складі
there
близько
was
100
a
членів,
working group
яка
within the
працювала
Verkhovna
декілька
Rada,
місяців,
and
і
it's been working for a
врешті-решт ми
few months.
таки
And at the end,
зробили
finally, we
оцей
developed this
законопроект, який і
draft
був
law,
таки врешті-решт
which
ухвалений.
was
Тому я
adopted
буду
finally.
дуже
So
сподіватися,
I
що
will
ви
truly
також
hope
скористаєтеся
that you
нашою
will also
допомогою
use
і
our
моєю
help
особистою.
and my
Я
personal
керувала
help.
цим проєктом.
I've been head of
І
that
Ліліним.
project
Лілю
and
все
Lilia's
ще не
also.
бачу.
I still
Тоді
don't
я
see
ще
Lilia, so
запитаю про
probably I will
GDPR.
ask about
Я знаю, що
GDPR.
саме Ліля
But I
очолювала
know that
робочу групу,
Lilia
яка
was the head
мала
of the
розробити
working group who
український
had to develop
аналог
Ukrainian
GDPR. Що далі
analog of
зараз
GDPR.
відбувається?
What is
Можливо, це вже
happening
буде
there?
до неї
And
питання,
maybe
а
that will
можливо,
be the
ви щось
question to her,
зможете
and maybe you
прокоментувати.
can comment
І щоб
something
два рази не
also.
вставати,
So,
про
like,
кібербезпеку мене також дуже
cyber
цікавить, що
security
там
is also
робиться.
very interesting
Дякую.
to me. What's happening there? Thank you.
Пані Ольго.
Ms. Olha?
Так, я думала, що питання все ж таки до Лілії адресоване.
I thought that it's a question to Lilia. As for personal data, our profile and directorate is involved to analysis of draft laws. But of course, we are not developers, so we can just analyze. As of now, as far as I understand, there is also the
органу, який буде так званим регулятором персональних даних. І, до речі,
issue raised about the body who's going to be the regulator, and this political regulator on personal data might also be in the system of these bodies that are going to be responsible for DSA DMA. That is, everything is in the process. And as for the cyber thing, so Ukraine founded the Cyber Dialogue Ukraine EU, and still this issue is more done by State Special Connection Service.
Я дуже перепрошую, в нас
I'm really
технічна
sorry,
проблема,
we have a
бо
technical
один спікер не
problem.
може
One
потрапити
speaker
до
can't
нашого
come
приміщення.
to
На
our
2 хвилиночки, пані Олько, я дуже... Пані
place.
Лілія, ви вже
Like,
тут?
Miss Lilia, you're here.
Лілія?
Lilia?
Лілія? Постукайте.
Just knock.
Так, зараз хвилиночку,
Okay,
зараз
just
ще
a
одного
minute. Just a
спікера
minute.
долучимо.
We will
Хвилиночку,
involve one more speaker. Just a minute, I'm sorry for technical difficulties.
Ви тут?
Lilia, are you here with us? Were you able to join?
Ліля.
Lilia? Yes. Yes, hello.
Я вже розказала,
I already mentioned about the translation of the Code of Digital Communication, about the working group and the draft laws. And I ask you also about the working group about GDPR and cyber safety, security. So one more question. Salha mentioned just perfectly about DSA, DMA, and I'm also really interested about how all of that is interconnected with the draft law on media. So is that like in touch, and we discussed the translations and the problems that we faced back then. Its absence of terminology base, which will be unified for all the draft laws in this sphere. Hi everyone. I am so sorry for problems because the connection is really problematic even in the city. So answering Oksana's question and commenting what the previous speakers mentioned, Ms. Olha, Mr. Serhi, the situation is as follows. In the European Union currently, there are like 20 normative and legal acts of the European level, that is, those are regulations or acts that will regulate the field of digital economy, including those Oksana mentioned already, that is the Digital Market, Digital Service Act, and that's going to be the new regulation for virtual assets. It is called MiCA in brief, and the new document concerning identification of parties of digital commerce and many new legislative acts that are strengthening safety of the European Union, especially in parts of cyber security and data protection. And thus, the European Union is making everything possible in order to like for the rules for e-commerce, digital services, and others would be equal for the whole European Union. Currently, for example, like still the blocking of goods and services, that is selling of goods, is related to the place of their production and where the taxes are paid, and not to the place where they are sold. So, and thus, European Union will try to take into account all these moments that appeared when joining to the unified digital thing. It started not today, not even yesterday, and it's happening more than 10 years already. And this like digital market strategy, it appeared a long time ago, as was mentioned earlier, then we signed the agreement with the European Union. And of course, the European Union is moving like step by step, and the first acts that were there for implementation of this strategy, they are living through the second review and the third iteration. And of course, this implementation for them is understandable, and indeed they are measuring their movement on digital market annually using index that Ms. Olha mentioned about, and thus they do understand where they have difficulties, problems, where they have significant progress. Is there any progress with application of the main digital market? It's building infrastructure, and building the infrastructure depends not only the 5G technologies that gave the opportunity to use this kind of internet, which is part of the market, but it's cybersecurity that has to move in line with all the services at the same time. And personal data protection, as we used to call it, even though that in the EU it is called differently, and they, let us say so, they are called like privacy protection. This term indeed is applied in different contexts, and I will agree with Ms. Oksana that indeed we need the unified terminology vocabulary, because when implementing European acts, all the time we are facing the issue that we don't have the corresponding thing that doesn't let to understand, like we can't understand the terms if they are not unified. And like the Code of Digital Communications, when it was translated, indeed we participated to the translation of this with Ms. Oksana, and we spent a lot of time for cooperation and interaction with all the stakeholders, private and state, in order to unify this base of terminology, at least for digital communications. Why is it important? Because other laws that are going to be developed to fulfill these acts for implementation and joining the unified digital market of the EU will rely on these terms without repeating those. And this work is incredibly important. And here a lot of things will depend on the committee on digital transformation, committee on national safety and defense. And in terms of defense as well, that is the legal committee that is going to spend a lot of time that act, and also like different committees. And what also Oksana mentioned, the committee together with the digital transformation, the committee on humanitarian policy, that is causing a lot of questions among the stakeholders, among Ukrainian colleagues, because, for example, there exists the media market, and maybe I will say a bit bad thing, but in Ukrainian tradition, the reform begins always really with a huge power, and it ends up, so let us do the reform in such a manner not to do anything. And of course, when we are talking about digital market, then interests of all the participants are touched, and the only digital market, it's the moment that, let us say so, that point where you can come back from implementation of which will depend in general our introduction, our entering to the European Union, because half of the acts that we have to implement, it's sticking to digital rights, is getting the right to have privacy, a private life, and freedom, access to information. These are key basic things without which the European Union doesn't see us at all. Why? Because for them it's not just simply world. These are fundamental things, and all digital and usual services and usual life are based on. So for us, the main task will be to implement GDPR. That is the main document in the field of protection of privacy and protection of confidentiality of data. The main will be implementation of the directive in the second edition, because it was included into the Annex 17.3, and we took obligation to ensure confidentiality in digital communications. And unfortunately, they were excluded in the development of, in the drafting the laws. I want you to hear me, because some providers, some operators disagree with that, and they thought that it's too early, and they thought that maybe we will do that one day, but we see how important it is as of today to have this safety and this protection of privacy, because the personal data that were free, it led to that the people in occupied territory, they knew where they are going to look for. People who were involved in anti-terroristic operation, or who were serving in the armed forces, they knew where to look for those. And it was also because that there were some data outflows from some kind of public services or public systems. terms. I can't say that for sure. Only experts can speak about that. I'm not the expert in the field of cybersecurity. I'm the expert in legislation because I'm the lawyer. In my education, I can just speak from my side about that. As for your question, Oksana, about Digital Service and Digital Market Act, our NGO always, just like usual, takes all the obligations on ourselves. We are going to translate those. We are going to try discuss these translations, and just the same way we were taking obligations and we were translating different documents before, including regulation on identification and digital services, a new edition which is just discussed in the European Union, and it hasn't been adopted yet. And thanks to our friends from Lithuania, our helpers, colleagues, partners who help and who are included to the working group on development of this new legislation, we had access to this document while it was editing, and it was a draft, but we already translated that, and the law Mr. Serhiy mentioned. At first, the Ministry of Digital Transformation had quite a big number of time spent on this draft because it's basic and it's infrastructure for all other acts and services, because it determines the main things, that is identification of the person in digital world.
And the committee, after the digital ministry finished the work, after they coordinated it on the government level, of course, a lot of time was needed to adapt the project. Why did we need so much time? This is not a question to the digital ministry. The draft was developed for more than a year, and the European Union was updating its norms. So we had to take into account the new norms of the EU. Our Vice Prime Minister, Mr. Fedorov, also agreed to participate in the IT wallet project, or electronic identification as it is called. That's why we were translating the second revision of EIDAS, the European Regulation of Electronic Identification, in order to take what is necessary for Ukraine to implement this norm right now. In order we should not be lagging, so that we shouldn't be lagging behind the European Union, but we should go alongside the European Union, just as we had agreed together with the Ministry of Digital Transformation to act at the same time. Of course, if we use our usual way, if we just sit and wait, we are not going to access the digital market anyway, because we will always be lagging behind for 2 to 5 years. This is the average lag of Ukraine in any sphere. From data protection, because GDPR has been implemented since the year 2018, it has recommended itself, it has been implemented by most of the countries in the world, Australia, New Zealand, the Great Britain, and partially the USA. In the California Act of Data Protection, it is also implementing GDPR. Even China, which is infamous for their nuances on data protection and information protection and other points in terms of human rights, even China developed data protection legislation, which is better than GDPR. I hope it will help Chinese residents to get free of constant care of the government. I'm not sure whether our audience knows that China has ratings. The ratings determine whether people can use different services. So if you have a bad rating, if you recommend yourself, if you show yourself as a bad user, about half of the services in the country can be closed for you. Well, this is how it looks like. In several years, you will not be even able to buy a loaf of bread without a social rating in China. As for our realities, as of out-of-staff counselor, As an expert that helped the digital ministry, my mission is more than difficult because I have reconciled everybody to help the things move on, because they don't have the same understanding. The committee doesn't always understand the Ministry of Digital Transformation. This is okay, this is normal situation. This is how the things go. Different agencies have different visions and tasks. The digital ministry is responsible for implementing the policy. The parliamentary committee has to find legal basis to implement the policy. Of course, they may have the discussions between themselves, but this is how democracy works. This is the correct way to go. And this is the way of Ukraine. I like it very much. Therefore, this is what I wanted to say. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer, but I would like to once again express my respect to Miss Olga, to Mr. Sergei, because they do everything they can today in our situation, and they have to face the realities that we have. For example, when we don't have electricity for a day or two, but they are doing everything to move us towards European Union, not digitally, but in real life as well. And I hope that we are going to enter the EU together. Alina, thanks a lot. I will surely include your words that it's necessary to grant, to ensure the level of cybersecurity and ensure the privacy. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Volodymyr. I hope that he is going to tell us about our Ukrainian achievements, where I hope where we have the best achievement when we are talking about recognition of digital signatures. I would like to say a few words about who I am and what we do. As of today, I'm the head of the Institute of Technologies of Cybersecurity and Information Protection of the government. So, we have this component. This is a government institution, non-profit institution. Our task is to ensure the security and safety of different types of special communications. We have resources and possibilities to also work in the civilian sphere. Our institute, well, we have an accredited laboratory. It has been accredited according to the ISO standards 17025. So we have created and we are ready to do the accreditation audit for certification bodies. In this context, we are creating a certification body of trustee services. So what did we do? As of today, we have already prepared with our European partners, we have prepared 4 auditors. In order for these auditors to be able to work, in order to evaluate the trustee services, they need about 20 days, and they need to conduct at least 4 audits monitored by 4 leading auditors. This is difficult because European companies that have to be audited, they don't want Ukrainian practitioners to be involved into their kitchen, internal kitchen. I don't know why, because in Germany and in Czechia, we were not able to get involved in the project in order to get some experience. Today we have completed the participation in the audit in Vietnam, so this was one case when we were able to get some experience. In the nearest time we will have another audit, compliance audit, together with our European partners in one of the Eurasian countries. So then we need to conduct 2 common joint audits, and after 4 audits we will be able to work by ourselves without supervision. Also, we are getting prepared to expand the sphere of operations of our laboratory to the standard 15408. So this is the standard used by all the countries of the Treaty on Mutual Recognitions, which is known as common criteria. Of course, this process will take more time. The main thing is that we need to have the equipment is very difficult, is very expensive. We have 90% of those pieces of equipment. We are almost ready, but in order to get prepared for accreditation, we need a lot of time, a lot of efforts. And of course, the war is not helping in this. What else I wanted to say, as for some interesting things that I have noticed. Recently, I participated in the work of a conference on trustee services in Europe, in Berlin. And I was interested in two reports. So, half of the reports, one of the representatives, ENISA, this is a European body responsible for cybersecurity. They dedicated their report to Ukraine and what steps Ukraine can make to get nearer to the mutual recognition treaty. And also another point is e-wallet. So these are the services provided by DIA in Ukraine. So if you are interested in this topic, you may know that in the new version of the regulation on the trustee service, they say that their European wallet has to correspond to the requirements of the highest level of security. There was a very lively discussion on the conference who say that the level of security is going to narrow down the market, that it will be impossible for everybody to use the services. So they say that we need the medium level of security to make it more accessible. So this question is still open for discussion. So the efforts, the work of our Ministry of Digital Transformation has the right to existence. So maybe it will be included in Europe. Well, sometimes they require more expensive chips and technologies. Of course, expensive technologies are more secure, but this is also a level of accessibility. I'm ready to answer the questions if you have, or I can participate in the discussion. Thanks a lot, Mr. Volodymyr. I have a question. So, when European signatures are going to be recognized in Ukraine? When will I be able to get European level of services in Ukraine? Well, this is the same way. When Europe recognizes Ukrainian signatures, Ukraine is going to recognize European ones. This is a legal question. This is not a technical point. The country needs to sign an agreement or a treaty. In order to sign an agreement, a lot of things have to be done. Mere statements or mere words, they are not worth a lot. Well, of course, it's good for awareness raising anyway, but there has to be a treaty between Ukraine and the EU on mutual recognition. So, the EU regulation on trustee services, it provides for this opportunity. As for the mere identification, the EU documents do not allow accession of third parties, so maybe we can do it using the trustee services. I'm going to comment, if I may. Yesterday we published a government decree. So we unilaterally recognize signatures of the European Union as a pilot project for 2 months, and I hope that the Ministry of Digital Transformation will make some conclusions after this experiment, after this pilot project, and we will see this. I can say that Digital Ministry is not very good at publishing the results of their pilot projects, of their pilot decrees. So we would like you to be more public about what was successful and what wasn't successful. Of course, from the technical point of view, didn't have any problems, and the pilot decree will show the same thing. So there are no problems from the technical point of view, but from the legal point of view, we have an enormous gap. We don't have the necessary level of cybersecurity. We don't have the necessary legal framework to protect the confidentiality. So we need to do a lot of work in the legal framework in order to hope for mutual recognition of trust services. Because this definition, the term, it has something to do with the trust. But you can trust the things that are protected and that have been verified. So Volodymyr was talking about digital wallet and identity. So DIA was recognized as one of the options to identify our citizens by a document of the European Commission, by the regulation of the European Commission. Of course, it's possible to do it without a regulation as well, to determine the implementation mechanism. So as for the trust services, we need to have a treaty, we need to ratify a treaty, we need to start preparation of the text of the treaty. As for the electronic identification, of course, the Digital Ministry will take a lot of efforts to show the European Commission that we are capable of doing this in another way, just as recognition of DIA certificates. So we already have precedents when electronic document of the DIA app were recognized in Europe. So Ukraine has a window of opportunities today. It is still open, and what we do depends on us. However, if we ignore the European documents, if we ignore the legal requirements of the EU, we will not be able to hope for a full-fledged membership in the EU, because we have the fundamental principle of the rule of law, and because of this, we have not only to read the documents, but we need to be able to implement the documents in a correct way. Thank you. We took some more time than necessary, but I have a personal question. So, if I get a European signature in 2 months, will it be cancelled in 2 months if I have a European signature? This is just for you to think later. I don't need an answer right now. We are going to continue our discussion later. Thanks to the participants, thanks to the Adamant, thanks to the interpreters and technical team. I will send the conclusions and findings of these sections later today, and by the end of the day, we will need to make some conclusions from all sections. Thanks a lot to everybody, and I hope to continue this discussion later. Thanks a lot and goodbye.